Each year on May 26th, the Church celebrates the memorial of St. Philip Neary, a 16th century priest. And the more I read of the life and the ministry of St. Philip, and the more I'm engaged in pastoral ministry, the more I've come to recognize St. Philip as a model and a guide of how it is that we are called to be disciples and how it is that we are to do the work of evangelization. Philip Neary was born in 1515 in Florence, and at the age of 18, he experienced a conversion and wanted to give his life to God. He left Florence and he went to Rome, and as he entered into the eternal city, he was shocked to see the dismay that the city was under, both the physical display of the city and the spiritual display of the city. Physically, Rome had been invaded a few years prior by the Germans, and there was great devastation, and it was never rebuilt or restored. But more worrisome of the physical dismay of Rome was the spiritual dismay that was existing. Sadly, a number of the priests and the bishops had stopped preaching and teaching the faith, and as a result of that, a number of the lay people stopped living and believing in the good news. This spiritual dismay deeply troubled Philip Neary, and this young 18-year-old took it to prayer, wondering what he could do and how could God act in the midst of this. As he was bringing this to prayer, all this was happening in the time when St. Francis Xavier, who had been doing missionary work in India, began to send letters back to Europe. And young Philip Neary was taken by these letters and the work that Francis Xavier and his companions were doing. How thousands were baptized, others were more engaged in the faith, and India was beginning to experience a new transformation. And so between his life of prayer and reading these letters, Philip Neary began to wonder if God was calling him to be a missionary priest. He eventually shared this in spiritual direction with an old priest from Rome, who affirmed to Philip Neary that yes, he was being called to be a missionary. Yes, he was being called to be a priest, but he was not being called to go to India. Instead, the old and wise priest said to young Philip Neary, "Rome is your India. Here is where you are called to spread the gospel." And accepting the wise advice of his spiritual director, Philip Neary, as a young 18-year-old, began to spread the good news, first as a layperson and eventually as a priest. But how did Philip Neary go about spreading the gospel in the midst of the spiritual and moral decay that had been happening in Rome? He did not get up on some platform preaching the gospel as we might expect, but instead he began going to the street corners of Rome. And as he engaged with people, he simply began to ask them the question, when are we going to start beginning to be good? When are we going to start beginning to be good? And this simple question began to invoke something in the people that passed him by, and became that moment for him to engage in a deeper conversation with them, a conversation that eventually would allow them to begin to explore the faith and to come to know Jesus Christ. And as Philip Neary was doing this work of street evangelization, many of the young people that he encountered desired to begin to follow Philip Neary. They were longing for a sense of community, a longing for a sense of belonging, longing for a sense of something deeper and more meaningful in life, and coming to find that in faith in Jesus Christ. And so Philip Neary, by the time of his death in 1595, began a transformation in Rome similar to that of St. Francis Xavier in India, and began to restore the moral order and spiritual life of the people. It is no wonder that today St. Philip Neary is known as the third apostle of Rome. The first two apostles, we just celebrated their solemnity this past week, when we celebrated the solemnities of the holy apostles Peter and Paul. And the third apostle of Rome is that of Philip Neary, this young student that experienced a deeper sense of call and conversion, that felt that he was being invited to be a missionary and to be a more faithful, fruitful disciple, and simply began to do so on a street corner by asking people, when are we going to start doing good and being good? I think Philip Neary presents to us a wonderful model of how it is that we are to live as missionary disciples, how it is that we are to live our call through our baptism and confirmation to be disciples of the Lord Jesus. As you know, last weekend as we gathered, we resumed our journey through the sacred season of ordinary time, and we began in this 9th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel, where Jesus is moving towards Jerusalem, knowing about his upcoming suffering and death, and wanting to prepare the apostles and the disciples to ensure that they understood what it meant to be his disciple when he would no longer be present, and to ensure that they were ready to embrace the cost of discipleship. And now, after laying that groundwork, this evening in our gospel, we hear Jesus sending out the disciples into their first missionary experience. We hear that Jesus sends the 70 in pairs of 2 to the surrounding towns and villages where he himself was going to go on his way to Jerusalem. They were to begin to prepare the hearts and the lives of the people so that when Jesus would come into their midst, they would be more open, more receptive to hearing his message, embracing the good news, and desiring to follow him. But as Jesus sends them out, he sends them out to be these missionaries, to be able to set the hearts on fire with the faith, with the good news. And as Jesus sends them out, we notice that he does so with 2 important qualifications, 2 important outreaches to them. First and foremost, we hear that as Jesus sends them out, there is a sense of urgency for them to go to these towns and villages. For Jesus not only knew that his time was short, but he knew how important the message was. And so he sent the 70 out. He didn't wait until they understood all of the message of the gospel. He didn't wait until they understood everything about the faith. He didn't wait until they were sinless and therefore then could be these perfect role models. But instead, because of the urgency, the necessity to send them out now and share the message, he took them in their humanity, in their brokenness, and was able to use them. So important was the mission that he even instructs them not to stop to talk to anyone on the way, but go to the town or the village that they were sent, and to be able to proclaim the good news and open the hearts and the lives of people. And so there was this spirit of urgency of the mission that they were engaged in. The second thing that we learn from Jesus sending out the 70 is that he also invited them in this sense of urgency to have a spirit of abandonment, a spirit of detachment. He gives them some very specific orders, not to take a bag, not to take an extra tunic, not to take sandals, not to be weighed down by the things of life, but rather in this spirit of poverty, in this spirit of abandonment, in this spirit of detachment, to simply trust in him, and the Spirit would guide and direct them. And they went out with those marching orders, and they were faithful in what Jesus asked. And as we will hear later in Luke's gospel, they returned back with a spirit of joy. They returned back with a spirit of excitement. They returned back with a spirit of exaltation because of the work that they were able to do, not on their own merits, but Christ working through and in them. And as a result, many hearts were changed and transformed to be able to accept the good news of Jesus and to be able to help build his kingdom in the here and now. This sense of mission, this sense of being sent by Jesus, was not just for the apostles and these 70 disciples of long ago, but as the work of St. Francis Xavier in India, as Philip Neary in Rome show us that the work of being missionary disciples is the call of each and every one of us, regardless of our age, our vocation, our way of life. But in and through our baptism, we are called to be missionaries. We are called to be intentional disciples. We are called to help others to come to know the Lord in their lives and to be able to build up the kingdom in the here and now. And this is what we celebrate as we hear Jesus sending the apostles and the disciples out, knowing that we too are being sent out. And as we look at the comparison between St. Philip Neary in the 16th century and what is happening in the midst of our lives today, I think there are many comparisons that are there. When we look at the physical and the moral and spiritual decay that was happening in Rome long ago, is that same not spiritual and physical decay also happening here in our midst? When we look at what is happening within our contemporary society, when we see the crisis of homelessness, of poverty, where we see the problems of the drug culture that is existing, when we see the breakdown of marriage, when we see the destruction of human life at the very beginning stages by abortion and the end stages by euthanasia and assisted suicide, do we not see a contemporary culture like Rome that was falling apart? And so we too, like Philip Neary, are called to be able to rebuild the city, to rebuild the culture, to rebuild the kingdom here and now. But we realize that we are not only experiencing this physical sense of decay that is happening, but we also know that there is a deeper spiritual decay that is happening, a deeper spiritual longing of people seeing an emptiness in their lives, of people that have fallen away from the sacred, and of people that are looking for something more. And as a result of that, we are called to be able to reach out and to be able to share the good news with others and to be able to help them come into an intimate, loving, personal relationship with the Lord Jesus. And so, like the disciples in the gospel, like St. Francis Xavier and St. Philip Neary, we too are being called to be these missionary disciples. And as we embrace that call to be missionary disciples, like St. Philip Neary recognized, we don't need to go to a third world country to be able to do the work of discipleship, the work of mission. But more often than not, it is under our same roof, and it is within our own purview of our eyes. For some of us, the mission field that we are being called to in the here and now is our own household. Perhaps it's a spouse or children or grandchildren that have stopped in the practice of the faith. And there is our missionary territory to be able to help them to return to the faith and to enter into a personal relationship with Christ. Maybe for others of us, the missionary territory that we find is in our neighborhood, of parishioners that we once knew that were coming to Mass and for some reason or no reason have stopped coming. And we are called to go to them and to rescue them and bring them back to this place of safety, this place that they can be fulfilled and nourished. Still, for others of us, the missionary field that we may find ourselves in is our workplace or our places of recreation, where we have opportunities to be able to live and to share the good news with those that we rub elbows with day by day, speaking out on the moral issues of the day, living the corporal and the spiritual works of mercy, and showing them how our faith makes a difference in our lives, how it gives to us meaning and hope in the midst of the burdens and the darkness and the despair that exists in our world. And finally, still for others of us today, the missionary field that we are being entrusted are those encounters that we have with strangers in our midst, someone in the line at the bank or the grocery store, a homeless person that we meet on the street, or someone that calls with the wrong phone number to us. And yet we have opportunities to be able to witness and to be able to live the good news. To be a missionary today is simply to be able to read the signs of the times like Philip Neary and invite others to a deeper sense of belonging, to a deeper sense of community, to a deeper sense of faith, so that they might come to know the Lord in their lives. And so tonight, as we celebrate our Eucharist, as we continue to journey with Jesus and the disciples on the road to Jerusalem, let us recognize the many and varied opportunities that are given to us day by day to be missionary disciples, to be able to live the faith, to be able to share the faith, and to be able to build the kingdom here and now, so that one day we might be able to enjoy it for all of eternity.